want to talk about the Ivy League and why it might actually matter more than people who are unfamiliar with it might appreciate. It's very easy for us to say, well, who cares? We're not involved with Harvard. We're not involved with the University of Pennsylvania. But in fact, we really are. What has obviously brought this to national attention has been the news about how the conflict in Gaza has given rise to this extraordinary and rather unpleasant explosion of anti-Israel protests on campuses, and particularly and notably on some of the most prestigious campuses in the country. But these are not really political at all, or if they're political, the politics of them is not what they claim to be, because they're directed at students who are Jewish. They're directed at Jewish symbols. In fact, recently there has been a trend towards attacking Jewish menorahs. Only kind of menorah there is. Menorah is the Hebrew word, Jewish Hebrew word for lamp. The root of it is ner, which means light. Menorah means a light a fire, not a fire, a lighter thingy, which has nothing to do with Israel, nothing to do with contemporary Israel, nothing to do with Gaza. Attacks are taking place on schools, on the campuses of schools such as the University of Pennsylvania and Harvard, which are both in the Ivy League. We'll talk about what it really means to be in the Ivy League in a second, and have gotten rather violent. And there have been points at which Jewish students have felt physically intimidated and have been advised by many people on campus and off, interested in their safety and well-being, to hide their identity. Now, not everyone is capable of doing that. I think even if I took my little hat off, I wouldn't be very good at hiding my identity. But it's a shameful place. It's a shameful development that students should have this experience on these campuses. Early last week, the presidents of three of the most prominent universities in the United States, Harvard, Penn, and Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, testified before a congressional committee in the House. This is the House Workforce and Education Committee. It's a very, very broad jurisdiction. And as everyone watching this probably knows by now, when asked whether these schools, all of which are known, especially Harvard, but also Penn, I don't know so much about what's going on at MIT, which is not, it's technically an Ivy League school. It's probably better than most of them, if not all of them, as an educational institution. But the questions that were asked included, given that these schools are all notorious for enforcing speech codes and for disciplining students who make others feel triggered, unsafe, threatened, why were such measures not put in place with respect to the treatment of Jewish students on these campuses, who were treated to some rather vicious threats and statements? The president of the University of Pennsylvania and the president of Harvard and the president of MIT, all middle-aged women, all answered that, well, it would depend on the context. You can't really call that threatening, can't really call that hate speech. And remember, hate speech is constitutionally protected. It absolutely is. You have a right to be a racist. You have a right to be an anti-Semite. You have a right to be a bigot of any kind you want. And you also have a right to express your bigoted opinions about others. That's okay. But private universities do have a certain amount of discretion to maintain the atmosphere in academic settings and on their campuses and among their faculties. They can make their own rules. There are limits to this, and I'm not really going to explore the legal aspect of this, although those limits are much lower when it involves a state institution, in other words, a state-owned school, a public university. But these are all private universities, and students routinely, and faculty are routinely disciplined for expressing unwoke speech.